He bought a cabin for only $200, a forgotten home buried in Alaskan snow. But peace didn't come with the price. That night, something beneath the floor began to move. His German shepherd, Ranger, a loyal war dog with golden eyes, began to growl and scratch the frozen boards, as if warning him that something alive was trapped below. Ethan Ward, a Navy SEAL haunted by war, followed his dog's instincts and uncovered a buried secret tied to a vanished journalist and a billion-dollar conspiracy. The storm outside wasn't the only thing trying to kill him. When faith was all he had left, Ethan realized God's miracles don't come with light and thunder. They come in silence, through loyalty, courage, and love. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and share to keep the light alive. The wind over Anchorage was a knife that never dulled. It scraped against the frozen pines and howled across the empty road as a lone pickup truck crawled through the snow. Inside, Ethan Ward kept both hands on the steering wheel, his breath fogging the windshield despite the heater's desperate hum. He was in his late 30s, lean and hard-edged, the kind of man shaped by discipline and loss. His brown hair was trimmed short, a few silver threads glinting in the dashboard light. A faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, souvenir from a mission that ended badly years ago, when he was still a Navy SEAL. Since then, he had carried that same quiet guilt like an invisible rucksack, never heavy enough to crush him, but too familiar to set down. Beside him sat Ranger, a 9-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and intelligent amber eyes that missed nothing. His ears twitched to every distant sound, every subtle vibration of the engine. Ranger had served 3 deployments beside Ethan, sniffing out explosives in dusty cities half a world away. He had saved Ethan's life twice, maybe 3 times, depending on how one counted miracles. Retirement hadn't softened him. His posture was still alert, his muscles tight beneath his fur. He was the kind of dog that seemed to understand silence better than words. The truck's headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness. Ethan glanced at the paper folded on the passenger seat, an official bill of sale from the Anchorage County Courthouse. Property sold as is, $200. It was so absurd he had laughed when he signed it. Who sold a cabin for $200 in 2025? Maybe a desperate family. Maybe someone hiding something. Or maybe no one wanted it because they already knew what waited there. Still, the thought of owning anything that was truly his, a place untouched by war, noise, or pity, had been enough to make him take the risk. The GPS flickered and died, leaving only the faint whisper of the radio before static swallowed it whole. Anchorage's last traces of light had long vanished behind him. Snow thickened, coating the road until it was barely visible. The cabin was 10 miles north of the river, tucked between a ridge and a frozen creek. It had belonged to a journalist, or so the courthouse clerk had said, a man named Arthur Hale, who vanished 15 years ago. Froze to death, some locals whispered, or something worse. Ethan's fingers tightened on the wheel as he remembered the clerk's expression, a young woman with tired eyes, maybe mid-20s, who had refused to look him in the face when he paid. "Nobody's been out there in years," she had murmured. "You'll need more than luck." Her name tag had read Sarah Holbrook. She smelled faintly of coffee and fear. He'd smiled politely and said nothing, but something in her trembling hands had stayed with him. It was the look of someone who had seen something she couldn't explain. When the road finally ended, it did so without warning. The truck's tires crunched over what looked like an old trail, the entrance marked by a crooked wooden sign half buried in snow. Faded letters read, "Hale Creek, private property." Ranger lifted his head, and let out a low growl that resonated in the small cab. Ethan reached over, rubbing the dog's neck. "Easy, boy. Just wood and wind." But Ranger's eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, his body rigid, ears forward, every muscle a question. The cabin appeared through the storm like a ghost caught in the beam of the headlights. Small, square, made of dark logs glazed with ice. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of snow, and the porch was half collapsed. One window was shattered, the hole stuffed with what looked like an old flannel shirt. Ethan killed the engine, and the sudden silence hit like a physical blow. The only sound was the wind moaning through the trees and the faint click of Ranger's claws on the door as he jumped out first, sniffing the air. The cold bit deep the moment Ethan stepped out. His boots sank into snow past his ankles. He looked up at the sky. No stars, only a lid of moving gray clouds pressing down on the world. The air smelled faintly of pine, rust, and something older. Damp earth sealed away too long. Inside, the cabin was exactly what $200 bought. One room, walls lined with soot, and a single rusted stove. A rickety table stood in the corner beside a chair with one missing leg. The fireplace dominated the left wall, built from uneven stones slick with frost. Ethan ran a hand over the mantel. It was smooth, almost too smooth, as if polished by more than just time. Ranger padded in behind him, sniffing the floorboards, tail low, body tense. "Home, sweet home," Ethan muttered, setting down his backpack. The words sounded hollow, even to him. He had lived in worse places. A metal outpost in Helmand, a bunker outside Basra. But this felt different. Those places had been meant to keep enemies out. This place felt like it had been meant to keep something in. He lit a small lantern and set it on the table. The light revealed faint scratches on the wall beside the door, letters carved by hand. HALE, the initials of the missing journalist. Below them, a second line, almost invisible under the grime. "Don't dig." Ethan stared at the words until his chest felt tight. The rational part of his mind, the soldier's training, told him it was nothing, just a remnant of a frightened man's imagination. But another part, the one that had learned to trust instinct and fear as survival tools, whispered otherwise. He turned to Ranger, who was standing motionless near the fireplace, his nose pressed against the lowest stones. A low, uneasy rumble built in the dog's chest. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. The dog didn't move. His body was a statue carved from tension. Ethan crouched beside him, following his gaze. There was a hairline crack along one of the stones, a seam just wide enough to slip a knife through. He touched it. It was faintly warm despite the freezing air. A pulse, almost. The lantern flickered. The wind outside howled louder, pressing against the walls as if something wanted in or out. Ethan stepped back, uneasy, his breath clouded before him in rapid bursts. The cabin creaked in reply. For a moment he thought he heard footsteps above the ceiling, slow, deliberate, impossible. Ranger barked sharply once, and the sound shattered the silence. Then, as suddenly as it came, everything stilled. Ethan exhaled and forced a laugh he didn't feel. "Great deal," he muttered. $200 and a free haunting." But the joke didn't stick. When he turned toward the window, he caught sight of something through the glass, just for an instant. A figure standing beyond the trees, motionless, pale against the darkness. He blinked, and it was gone. He shut the curtains, locked the door, and sat beside Ranger, his back to the fireplace. The dog's breathing was steady, but his ears stayed up, tracking sounds Ethan couldn't hear. Outside, the storm began to rise, snow slashing against the walls like 1,000 whispering hands. Inside, the air thickened, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to believe he had bought a house, not a secret waiting to be unearthed. But deep down, he already knew the truth. Nothing worth $200 ever came without a cost. The next morning came gray and hollow, the kind of light that never fully broke through the clouds. Ethan Ward woke to the sound of Ranger's claws clicking softly across the wooden floor. The dog was already standing near the fireplace again, head tilted, ears forward, staring at the same seam of stone from the night before. Ethan rubbed his face, feeling the roughness of a beard he hadn't trimmed in days. "Still there, huh?" he muttered, his voice gravelly from sleep. He poured a small measure of coffee from his thermos, lukewarm, bitter, grounding, and stood watching the dog's unease. There was something unsettling about how deliberate Ranger's posture was. This wasn't fear, it was vigilance. Outside, the storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt unnatural. Snow lay untouched, a white shroud that erased all evidence of life. Ethan pulled on his jacket, heavy with the smell of oil and old wool, and stepped outside. The air bit his skin like needles. He circled the cabin slowly, scanning for tracks. There were none. No prints, no tire marks, no sign of anything human. He crouched near the window where he thought he'd seen the figure last night. The snow beneath it was smooth. "Either I'm losing my mind," he whispered, "or they float." Ranger followed, pressing close to his side, breath misting in steady clouds. Ethan's military instinct had always been to catalog everything: sounds, smells, inconsistencies. Now that same instinct whispered that this silence wasn't peace. It was waiting. He glanced up at the forest line. Pines loomed tall, dark, and still, their branches heavy with frost. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cried once and went silent. When he returned inside, the cabin's air felt warmer, too warm. He checked the small iron stove. It was unlit. The warmth came from the fireplace. Ethan crouched beside it, laying a hand on the stone. It was faintly pulsing with heat, like the rhythm of a heartbeat deep underground. His breath caught. "That's not possible," he murmured. He fetched his utility knife and scraped gently along the crack. Beneath the soot, he saw something glimmer faintly, a dark resin, flexible under the blade. Not cement. Something poured and hardened, almost like pitch. Someone had sealed the base of the fireplace deliberately. He set the knife down and stared, his heartbeat quickening. Whoever Arthur Hale was, he hadn't just built a fire pit. He'd hidden something inside it. And if Hale had carved "Don't dig," maybe he hadn't been warning others away. Maybe he'd been warning himself. The crunch of tires outside made him jolt upright. Through the window, a vehicle was slowly climbing the ridge road, a county SUV, white with blue stripes. The decal read Anchorage Sheriff's Department. Ethan stepped out onto the porch as the car stopped, the door opening with a groan. A man emerged, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a thick parka trimmed with fur. His face was red from the cold, but there was something deliberate about his movements. No wasted motion. His jaw was square, lined with gray stubble. His eyes were small and calculating, like a predator measuring distance. "Morning," the man called, voice carrying a practiced friendliness. "You the new owner?" Ethan nodded cautiously. "That's right, Ethan Ward." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff Harold Briggs," he said, extending a gloved hand. His handshake was firm, almost possessive. Not many folks come up here anymore. Cabin's got a bit of a reputation. Ethan released his hand. Yeah, I heard. Figured rumors don't scare me much. Briggs chuckled, low and dry. Sure, rumors. You'd be surprised how many of those come from people who never left their own porch. He took a step past Ethan, glancing toward the door. Mind if I take a look around? Just a routine thing. County likes to make sure no one's camping in condemned property. Ethan hesitated, then opened the door. Be my guest. The sheriff stepped inside, eyes sweeping the room with the precision of someone trained to notice what others missed. His gaze lingered on the fireplace for a fraction too long. Old stonework, he said casually. Used to be built from creek rock back in the day. Some of it comes up from the riverbanks, carries all kinds of minerals. Ranger stood beside Ethan, hackles raised. Briggs noticed and grinned. Fine animal you've got there. War dog, right? You can tell by the way they watch. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. He's seen his share. Must have seen plenty yourself. The sheriff's tone shifted just slightly. Curiosity edged with something sharper. You were military? Ethan didn't answer right away. Once. Good to have a soldier around, Briggs said, still scanning. Things get strange out here in winter. People see lights, hear things. Hard to tell what's real when it's 30 below. He smiled again, but his eyes didn't blink. Just make sure you stay warm and out of trouble. Place has got history. When the sheriff finally left, the sound of his tires crunching away faded slower than it should have. Ethan watched until the car vanished beyond the ridge, then turned to Ranger. He knows, he whispered, about something. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease. Ethan worked mechanically, fixing a broken hinge, shoring up the door against the cold. But every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward the fireplace. The heat had grown stronger. As dusk settled, a faint hum seemed to rise from within the stones, a vibration too low to be sound. Ranger paced the floor, uneasy. After dinner, a can of beans shared between man and dog, Ethan couldn't resist any longer. He grabbed his crowbar and knelt by the hearth. All right, let's see what you're hiding, he muttered. He chipped away at the resin, small, flakes snapping off. The deeper he dug, the clearer the seam became. Underneath was not stone but metal, flat, dark, and cold. He brushed it clean, heart pounding. It was a hatch, seamlessly built into the foundation. He sat back on his heels, staring. There was a tiny engraved marking in the corner, letters too small to read without light. He fetched his lantern, adjusted the wick, and held it close. The engraving read, NP-13, the same code stamped on old military inventory tags. Or maybe something else, something corporate. Before he could process it, Ranger growled, a low, deep rumble. Ethan froze, listening. A faint sound reached him through the storm outside, the crunch of footsteps approaching. He turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness. Ranger stood poised, silent. The steps stopped right outside the door. Then, 3 sharp knocks. Ethan's hand went to the pistol on his belt. Who's there? He called. A pause. Then a voice. Female, shaky. Mr. Ward, it's Sarah Holbrook, from the courthouse. Ethan exchanged a glance with Ranger, then opened the door halfway. The young woman stood on the porch, snow clinging to her coat and hair. Up close, she looked even more fragile than he remembered. Slender, mid-20s, pale with dark rings beneath her blue eyes. Her blonde hair was tied loosely, strands plastered to her cheeks. She held a small folder in her gloved hands. I'm sorry to come this late. she said breathlessly. I didn't know where else to go. You need to leave this place. Slow down, Ethan said, stepping aside. Get inside before you freeze. She hesitated, then entered, her gaze darting around the dim room. Her eyes stopped at the fireplace, widening slightly. You opened it, she whispered. Not yet, Ethan said. Why? Sarah's lips trembled. Because that's where Arthur Hale died. For a heartbeat, the words didn't make sense. Then the wind slammed against the door, and the lantern flickered as if reacting to her confession. Ethan stared at her, the weight of her sentence sinking in. You'd better start talking, he said quietly. Sarah swallowed hard, clutching the folder. Arthur Hale worked for the Anchorage Post. 15 years ago, he was investigating a company, North Point Energy. He believed they were leaking waste into the river. Then he went missing. The county said he ran off, but he didn't. He sent one last letter to the courthouse. She pulled a crumpled page from the folder, her hands trembling. He wrote, If they find me, tell whoever buys this cabin, don't dig. It's sealed for a reason. Ethan looked at the hatch beneath the stone, the letters NP-13 burning like fresh ink. The wind howled louder, as though the world outside was warning him to stop. Ranger pressed closer to his leg, growling softly. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. I think what he found down there is still alive. And in that instant, the faint hum from the fireplace deepened into something that felt like breathing. The wind had grown quieter by midnight, but inside the cabin, silence was a living thing. It pressed against the walls, listening. Ethan Ward sat beside the fireplace, staring at the sealed metal hatch where the faint hum still vibrated through the stones. Sarah Holbrook sat opposite him, her knees drawn close, eyes wide and glassy with fear. Ranger lay between them, head resting on his paws, but his amber eyes never blinked. The fire had died down to embers, and their glow flickered against the walls, like heartbeats. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded Arthur Hale's final letter again, though she had already read it twice. He wrote that whatever he found down there wasn't human, she whispered. Her voice was soft and hoarse, the sound of someone who hadn't slept in days. He said it moved. It breathed even when the ground was frozen. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression unreadable. You think he was losing his mind? She shook her head, blonde strands falling across her pale face. Arthur wasn't the kind of man who imagined monsters. He was a scientist before he became a reporter. He measured everything, cataloged every detail. He wouldn't have written this unless he truly believed it. Ranger lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking. A deep growl rolled through his chest. Ethan tensed. Someone's outside, he murmured. He stood, grabbing the pistol from his holster. Sarah's breathing quickened as he moved to the window, parting the curtain just an inch. The darkness beyond the glass was thick and unmoving. Then, movement. A flicker of white light swept across the tree line, then vanished. Ethan recognized the rhythm immediately, the slow, deliberate scan of a flashlight. They're watching, he said. Sarah clutched the folder against her chest. The sheriff? Maybe, or someone working for him. Ethan turned off the lantern and gestured for her to stay quiet. They waited. The only sound was the soft thud of snow falling from the roof. After a full minute, the light disappeared. But the quiet that followed was worse. Ethan felt the hair on his arms rise. He'd learned in war that predators, human or otherwise, made less noise before they struck. Ranger stood, tail stiff, eyes locked on the door. His breathing changed, steady but ready. Ethan crouched beside him, whispering, "Guard." The dog moved toward the entryway, silent as a shadow. A moment later, Ranger's head snapped toward the back wall, toward the fireplace. Ethan froze. The hum had grown louder. Sarah stood up, backing away instinctively. "It's coming from there," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan grabbed the crowbar again. "If something's under this cabin, I'm not waiting for it to come out first." Sarah shook her head in panic. "Don't! You don't know what's down there." "I don't need to," Ethan said. "I just need to know why they want it hidden." He jammed the crowbar into the seam and pulled. The resin cracked with a sharp pop. A gust of air escaped from the gap, warm, metallic, and heavy with the stench of decay. Ranger snarled, his fur standing on end. Ethan coughed, eyes watering. The smell was like rust and blood. He pushed again, harder. The hatch lifted with a screech of metal, revealing a square opening that breathed heat like a furnace. A dim red light flickered below, pulsing faintly, as if something alive moved in rhythm with it. Sarah covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Ethan lowered the lantern carefully, angling it toward the hole. The light revealed a short ladder descending into a narrow chamber lined with concrete and steel. Pipes ran along the walls, slick with condensation. He could see old equipment, glass vials, and the broken remains of what looked like monitoring devices. In the center of the small space sat a cylindrical tank, half buried in frost, its metal skin cracked but intact enough to see something inside. A dark shape suspended in cloudy fluid. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered. Sarah's voice was barely audible. "He called it Project NP, North Point's experiment. They said they were studying bacterial adaptation in permafrost. But Arthur found proof they were using biological samples. Human DNA spliced with synthetic tissue. Something that could survive extreme conditions." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "You mean they built this? They grew it?" Sarah's voice broke. "He said they were trying to create a living organism that could consume toxins, an organism that feeds on pollution. But it mutated. It started feeding on organic matter. People." Ranger barked suddenly, a sharp warning. From outside came the crunch of footsteps again, this time closer, multiple sets moving fast. Headlights cut through the cracks in the boarded window. Ethan snatched the lantern back and slammed the hatch shut. "They're here." Sarah's hands trembled. "What do we do?" Ethan's voice was steady now, soldier calm. "We survive." He moved quickly, dousing the lantern, chambering a round in his pistol. Ranger stood ready beside the door, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The knock came hard and sudden, 3 sharp blows, then a voice, male, deep, authoritative. "Open up, Ward! Sheriff Briggs!" Ethan didn't move. The door rattled again, harder this time. "We know she's in there with you. Don't make this difficult." Sarah's eyes darted to him. "He'll kill us." "Not if we stay quiet." A moment of silence. Then, the metallic click of a latch outside. Ethan's mind worked fast. He knew that sound. The sheriff wasn't knocking anymore. He was picking the lock. He gestured for Sarah to hide behind the table. She crawled there, clutching the folder to her chest. Ethan crouched beside the window, gun raised. The lock turned. The door creaked open. Sheriff Briggs stepped inside, followed by another man, tall, lean, wearing a black coat and snow goggles pushed up onto his forehead. His skin was pale, his movements economical. The kind of man who never wasted a step. He carried himself like someone used to giving orders quietly. Ethan's eyes caught the badge pinned under the man's lapel. Victor Crane, Security Director, North Point Energy. Briggs smiled, his breath fogging the cold air. "Evening, Mr. Ward. Sorry for the intrusion. We just need to clear up a misunderstanding." Ethan kept the gun low but ready. "You've got bad timing, Sheriff." Crane spoke before Briggs could answer, his voice smooth but detached. "We're here for company property. There's a containment unit under this cabin that doesn't belong to you. Open it, and no one gets hurt." His gaze flicked briefly toward Ranger. "That includes the animal." Ethan felt heat rise behind his eyes. "You touch him, and I'll show you what hurt looks like." Crane's faint smirk vanished. He motioned to Briggs, who raised his rifle. The tension stretched so tight it felt like it might break the air itself. Then, Ranger moved. The dog lunged forward with explosive force, knocking the rifle aside. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the small cabin. Splinters rained from the wall. Ethan fired once, hitting the floor near Briggs's boots, forcing him back. Crane ducked, shouting something, but Ranger was already on him, teeth sinking into the man's coat sleeve. Crane screamed, the sound raw and human in a way his calm demeanor had never been. Ethan grabbed Sarah by the arm. "Go, out the back!" They bolted toward the rear door, Ranger releasing his grip only when Crane collapsed, clutching his bleeding arm. Ethan kicked the back door open, snow blasting in. They plunged into the blizzard, wind clawing at their faces. Behind them, Briggs's furious voice echoed, "Find them! Don't let them reach town!" As they stumbled into the trees, Ranger turned once, barking into the storm. In the distance, through the blowing snow, the cabin's windows glowed faintly red, the hum rising again, louder now, as if the thing beneath had finally woken up, snow-swallowed sound. Every breath Ethan Ward took disappeared into the storm before he could hear it. The forest loomed in white and gray around him, towering pines bending under the weight of the blizzard, their branches whispering secrets no man should know. His jacket was frozen stiff, his beard coated in ice, and yet he pushed on through knee-deep drifts with Ranger close at his side and Sarah stumbling a few steps behind. The glow of the burning cabin was gone now, hidden by distance and snowfall, but the red flicker had burned itself into Ethan's memory like a scar. Sarah gasped, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They'll find us. They have snowmobiles." Her blonde hair was plastered to her cheeks, her blue eyes wild and glassy from cold and fear. She looked fragile, like porcelain cracking under pressure, yet there was a quiet strength in her that surprised Ethan. She had followed him without hesitation when he said run, even when bullets had shattered the air. "They'll follow tracks first," Ethan replied. "We need to break the pattern. Head downhill toward the riverbed." His voice was steady, the calm of a man who had spent years moving through chaos. Ranger trotted ahead, nose low, tail rigid. The dog's fur was dusted with snow, the dark saddle pattern blending with the night. Every few steps he stopped, ears twitching, reading the storm in ways no human could. Half a mile later, they reached the frozen creek. The surface was a jagged mirror of ice, fractured but solid enough to walk on. Ethan led them onto it, each step a dull echo in the vast cold. Somewhere in the distance, an engine roared, a low mechanical snarl cutting through the wind. Sarah's head jerked toward the sound. Ethan muttered a curse. "They're faster than I thought." They moved again, keeping low, following the curve of the creek until it widened into a small clearing. A half-collapsed hunting shack stood there, its roof bowed beneath years of neglect. Ethan pushed the door open, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside was darkness, stale air, and the faint smell of oil. He swept his flashlight around. A broken cot, a rusted stove, and racks of old traps lining the wall. "We rest here," he said. 5 minutes. Sarah sank onto the cot, wrapping her arms around herself. Her fingers were raw and red from the cold. "What do we do when they find us?" Ethan crouched near the door, checking the pistol's magazine. "We don't make it easy for them." Ranger sat beside him, panting lightly, eyes fixed on the door. Ethan reached down, scratching behind his ear. "Good work back there, partner." The dog licked his gloved hand once, then resumed his vigil. Minutes passed. The only sound was the storm. Then faintly, under the howl of wind, voices, male, rough, distorted by helmets. Ethan killed the flashlight. Through a gap in the wall, he saw them. 4 figures on snowmobiles, lights cutting thin beams through the blizzard. The men wore matte black suits with heavy winter armor and mirrored goggles that erased their faces. One of them dismounted, pulling off his helmet. He was in his 40s, weather-tanned, with close-cropped hair and a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. His eyes were gray, sharp, and merciless. This was Cole Maddox, North Point's field commander, former private military contractor, a man who'd traded conscience for pay long ago. Maddox spoke into a radio clipped to his vest. "Visual on heat signatures. Spread out. Crane wants them alive." His tone was calm, confident, the voice of someone who had hunted men before and expected to do it again. Ethan whispered to Sarah, "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Ranger began a low growl. A vibration felt more than heard. The men outside fanned into the trees, boots crunching on ice. One beam of light swept across the shack window and lingered. Ethan froze. A shout followed. "Contact! Shack ahead!" He didn't wait. "Down!" he barked, shoving Sarah to the floor as gunfire tore through the wall, splinters of wood flying. Ranger lunged toward the opening, barking furiously, his teeth flashing in the muzzle flare. Ethan returned fire. 3 precise shots. A grunt, then silence. One of the attackers fell. "Move!" Ethan grabbed Sarah's arm and ran for the back exit, kicking it open. Cold slammed into them like a wall. Ranger bounded ahead, barking once, then stopped dead, nose high. Ethan followed his gaze and froze. A red glow pulsed from the direction of the cabin, faint but visible even through the storm. It wasn't fire anymore. It was something deeper, alive, expanding. The air vibrated with a low, throbbing sound like breathing through the earth itself. Then came another noise. Wet, dragging, impossible. Maddox and his remaining men turned too, their flashlights catching clouds of red mist rolling between the trees. "What the hell is that?" one shouted. Maddox raised a hand, silencing him. "Hold formation." But his voice trembled. The ground quivered. A fissure split the snow near the creek, steaming despite the freezing air. From it came a smell of rot and metal. Ethan pulled Sarah behind a fallen log, whispering, "Don't move." Ranger crouched beside them, his fur bristling. Out of the fissure came movement, slow, deliberate. Something metallic clanked, followed by a slick sound like meat tearing. A shape began to rise, tall, skeletal, its surface glinting wetly under the scattered light. It was almost human in outline, but wrong. Too long, too thin, its limbs jointed backward like a spider's. Beneath its translucent skin, veins of red light pulsed in rhythm with the earth's hum. One of Maddox's men screamed and opened fire. Bullets hit the creature, but instead of falling, it turned its faceless head toward the shooter. The air shimmered. A wave of heat blasted outward. The man's scream cut short as his weapon melted in his hands. Maddox stumbled back, horror shattering his discipline. "Fall back, now!" Ethan didn't wait. "Go!" he yelled to Sarah. They sprinted through the trees, snow exploding underfoot. Behind them, gunfire and inhuman shrieks mixed into one long nightmare. Ranger ran beside them, occasionally glancing back, guarding their flank. The forest blurred into white chaos. After what felt like an eternity, the noise behind them faded. Ethan slowed, chest heaving. They had reached the old river bend where the trees thinned and the wind was weaker. He collapsed to one knee, breath frosting in the air. Sarah sank beside him, sobbing quietly. Ranger circled once before lying down, sides heaving. His fur was singed near his haunch, a thin line of heat damage where something had grazed him. Ethan checked the wound, surface only. "You're okay, boy," he murmured. Ranger nudged his arm as if to reassure him instead. They stayed there, silent except for the wind. Finally, Sarah spoke, voice raw. "That thing, it's what Hale found, isn't it?" Ethan stared into the distance where faint red still glowed through the storm. "No," he said slowly. "That's what they made after him." Somewhere far off, the blizzard swallowed another scream. Morning arrived in shades of ash and silver. The blizzard had thinned to a whisper, leaving the forest coated in heavy snow and the air still as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan Ward sat beside a dying fire beneath a rocky overhang, his body hunched forward, breath ghosting in front of him. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on Ethan's boot, a thin bandage wrapped around his side where the heat had grazed him. The dog's breathing was steady, but his eyes remained half open, ever watchful. Sarah Holbrook slept a few feet away, her face pale and drawn, her blonde hair tangled, lashes trembling with the remnants of nightmares. She had cried in her sleep, whispering Arthur Hale's name. Ethan hadn't woken her. He knew what it was to dream of ghosts. When she finally stirred, he handed her a cup of water from melted snow. "We can't stay here long," he said quietly. "They'll be regrouping." Sarah's voice cracked. "You think that thing killed all of them?" Ethan stared out toward the white horizon. "No. Maddox is too smart to die easy. He'll retreat, call for reinforcements. They'll try to contain it." He paused. "But that thing doesn't understand containment." Sarah shivered, pulling her coat tighter. "Then we need help. The FBI, someone." Ethan looked down at the frozen satellite phone he'd salvaged from the truck earlier that morning. Its casing was cracked, but he had managed to coax power back into it using a small battery pack from his field kit. "Help's only good if it comes fast," he said, "and the kind that's coming might not be friendly." As if to prove him right, Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. Ethan followed his gaze to the distant tree line. A figure was moving slowly toward them, half limping through the snow. Ethan raised his pistol instinctively, his finger brushing the trigger. The shape resolved into a man wrapped in a tattered black coat, his movements jerky and unsteady. When he stepped into clearer light, Ethan recognized the face, or what was left of it. Cole Maddox. His left arm hung useless at his side, the coat sleeve scorched. Frost clung to his beard and eyebrows, and his gray eyes looked hollow, the bravado gone. Blood had dried on one side of his jaw, black against the cold. "You shouldn't shoot me," he rasped. "Not unless you want that thing finding you first." Ethan didn't lower the gun. "You've got about 3 seconds to make me believe you're not leading it here." Maddox laughed weakly, a dry, broken sound. If I were leading it, we'd both be dead already. He staggered forward and collapsed to his knees in the snow. Ranger growled, stepping between him and Ethan. The ex-mercenary raised his hands slowly. Easy, soldier. I'm not your enemy anymore. That thing killed Crane and the rest. Tore through them like they were paper. You want to stop it? You'll need me. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You think I trust the man who tried to kill me? Maddox coughed, spitting blood into the snow. Trust's a luxury. Survival's the job. Sarah stepped closer, her face tense. Why should we believe you? You worked for North Point. Maddox looked at her with a flicker of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. I worked for money, like everyone else. But even I didn't know what they built. Crane said it was dormant, sealed for good. They thought it needed heat to reactivate. He gave a broken laugh. Turns out all it needed was fire. You lit it up when that cabin burned. The words hit Ethan like a blow. He turned slightly away, jaw tightening. So it's my fault. No, Maddox said, shaking his head. It was going to wake sooner or later. The ice was cracking anyway. You just sped up the clock. A distant rumble rolled through the forest then, low and thunderous. Birds scattered from the trees in a flurry of black feathers. Ranger barked once, sharply. Maddox's face blanched. That's it. It's moving north, toward the river, toward the town. Sarah gasped. Anchorage? Ethan stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. We stop it before it gets there. Maddox smirked faintly, wiping blood from his mouth. You don't stop something like that with bullets. Then what do you suggest? Ethan asked. There's a fail-safe, Maddox said, voice weak but urgent. North Point installed it years ago in case containment failed. A dead man's switch, buried in the first facility 20 miles east, near the old hydro station. It releases a chemical compound designed to neutralize the organism's tissue. But it's manual. Someone has to trigger it. Sarah's brow furrowed. You mean, someone has to be there? Maddox nodded once. Within 100 yards. It's not built for safety, it's built for denial. If we don't set it off, that thing reaches Anchorage by nightfall. Ethan studied him for a long moment. The old soldier in him wanted to reject the plan. It smelled like a suicide run. But he saw truth in Maddox's eyes. Not redemption, but exhaustion. The kind that came after too many bad choices. Show me the way, Ethan said. They moved by afternoon, a small, desperate caravan cutting through the snow. Maddox walked ahead, favoring his left leg, his breath ragged. Ranger scouted their flanks, occasionally pausing to sniff the wind. Sarah walked in the middle, clutching the folder like a relic, her eyes scanning the horizon for any movement. As dusk bled across the sky, the hydro station came into view, a cluster of concrete buildings half buried in ice, the remains of a power facility long abandoned. Rusted pipes jutted from the snow like the bones of some giant creature. The place reeked of metal and old oil. Maddox pointed toward a half-collapsed structure near the dam. Control rooms under that? Ethan nodded. Stay with Sarah, he told him. Ranger, and I will clear the path. But as he stepped forward, the ground trembled. A deep, rhythmic thud echoed from beneath the ice, like footsteps too heavy to belong to anything human. Ranger growled low, teeth bared. From the edge of the dam, a shape rose slowly, steam billowing off its glistening form. It was larger now, hunched and sinewy, red veins pulsing through its translucent skin. It had grown. Sarah screamed. Maddox fumbled for his rifle, but his frost-bitten fingers slipped. The creature turned toward them, its eyeless head tilting, and the sound it made was not a roar, but a chorus of whispers layered into one. Ethan fired 3 rounds. The bullets barely slowed it. "Run!" he shouted. Ranger lunged forward, barking furiously, drawing its attention away. Ethan saw the control room door ahead, a small steel hatch half buried under debris. He turned to Maddox. "You can still stop it." The man met his eyes, and for the first time, there was something human in them. Resolve. Maddox staggered forward, shouting, "Get them out of here!" He dove toward the hatch, wrenching it open. "Go, damn you!" Sarah pulled at Ethan's arm, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. "Ethan, please!" He hesitated 1 heartbeat longer, then grabbed her and ran. Behind them, the creature lunged, its claws tearing through ice and steel. Maddox disappeared into the control room. A second later, light flared. A cold blue flash that swallowed sound, snow, and sky alike. The shockwave knocked Ethan to the ground. When he looked back, the dam was gone, replaced by a crater of frozen mist. The red glow had vanished. Only silence remained. Ranger limped toward him, panting, muzzle frosted. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's neck. "It's over," he whispered. But deep inside, he wasn't sure. When the snow finally melted and the valley began to breathe again, Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the light of dawn brushed the mountains with gold. He had lost much, but standing beside Ranger, he understood something deeper. Sometimes miracles don't come as fire or thunder. They come as quiet endurance, as the strength to keep walking through fear. What happened beneath that cabin wasn't just a battle between man and monster. It was a test of faith. Out there, surrounded by the cold silence of Alaska, Ethan realized that even in the darkest hours, God never left. He sent a loyal companion when the world turned its back. He gave warmth when there was no sun, and he planted courage where despair once lived. Maybe that's what miracles truly are. Not grand displays, but small mercies that keep us alive long enough to become someone better. So tonight, as you finish this story, take a moment to be grateful for your loved ones, for your faith, for the silent miracles that guide you each day. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it, comment below, and subscribe to join a family of souls who still believe in hope, loyalty, and God's grace. May the Lord bless every viewer who watches this story, protect every loyal heart, and remind us all, even in the storm, His light never fades.